Welcome to Dear 21-Year-Old Me, where we ask our guest what they'll say to their 21-year-old self and go back in time and discover how they celebrated their 21st birthday. He's your host, Jeremy Irvine.
Hello and thanks for joining us. Today on the show, we catch up with Sarah Makris, a career success coach who helps senior executives to develop their personal brands so they can increase their professional value and fast-track their career. Sarah's had a fascinating career working with some of Australia's big firms and now runs her own business, developing leaders in her own right. But before we meet Sarah, let's go back to the year 1997 to find out what was happening when she was turning 21. The 69th Academy Awards, hosted by Billy Crystal, are held, with The English Patient winning Best Picture. During the event, the DVD format is launched in the United States. Tony Blair becomes Prime Minister of the UK as the Labour Party wins the 1997 UK general election and returns to government for the first time in 18 years. Diana, Princess of Wales, is taken to a hospital after a car accident in Paris and sadly passes. While here in Australia, 18 people are killed in the Thredbo landslide in the Snowy Mountains Resort in New South Wales. Tasmania becomes the last Australian state to decriminalise homosexuality, and a crowd of over 100,000 people, and I was there, watches the Royal Canberra Hospital implosion. A 12-year-old girl, Katie Bender, is killed instantly, and 9 others are injured when debris from the site travels across Lake Burley-Griffin. In sport, the Melbourne Storm Rugby League franchise is formed. Adelaide defeats St Kilda to claim their first VFL/AFL premiership, and in league, the Super League war comes to an end with the ARL and Super League forming the NRL. American animated comedy series South Park premieres on SBS, and Australians become instant High Court experts, courtesy of Dennis Denuto's argument about the vibe in the iconic Australian film The Castle. On a budget of $750,000, the film goes on to make $11 million at the box office. And to quote Daryl Kerrigan himself, "No, Chellam, I'm not dreaming." What an absolute classic movie that is. Savage Garden holds the number 1 album in Australia in 1997. While top singles included Bop by Hanson. Wish I hadn't said that, Jeremy. Bop, remember that. Trisha Yearwood's How Do I Live? Remember that. And Elton John's remake of Candle in the Wind in tribute to Diana, Princess of Wales, tops the Australian singles of that year. It is the year 1997. And it's in 1997 when our guest Sarah Makris turned 21. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So you heard the introduction before when we stepped back in time to 1997 and Bop and Trisha Yearwood and Savage Garden. What do you remember about that year, the music notwithstanding? And tell me about your actual 21st birthday.
Oh, well, what I remember, how can you not remember Princess Diana? That was just such a moment. And, obviously I still remember where I was, driving my car, I was living at home, and I just remember it was just devastating. So definitely remember all of that. My 21st, okay, so it wasn't very eventful, I've got to say. I was working full time at that stage, and I had my boyfriend, so we went out to dinner and went clubbing. My boyfriend is now my husband, so that's...
Where did we go clubbing? Because this will age us both, and this will put us in Melbourne very... Or is that secret agent stuff, Sarah? Come on, you can tell me.
No, not that secret. Prince nightclub in St Kilda.
Cool. There's nothing dodgy like the Stylist in Ferntree Gully before it burned down. Anyway, so we went out for... You're a good Eastern Suburbs girl. No. Well, that just shows the bogan in me. Anyway, and good evening to Juice Nice Club in Maroondah Highway in Ringwood. So we went out. We went out with the boyfriend, who's now the husband. That's great. Well done, you.
Yeah.
Chick. Yeah, you picked that one early, didn't you? That was good. That was.
You didn't get married that early. We didn't get married until I was 34 and had one child. But
right.
Yeah.
How postmodern of you, Sarah. That's very. Yeah. So we were going out for dinner with husband, now boyfriend / now husband.
Yes.
Big party, or was it just you and the man and just how
Just
did it all work that night?
me, and some friends and, close
Cool.
friends. So I wasn't, because I was working full time, I wasn't in the uni scene at that stage. So, I was, and my husband also has his own business too. So we had a lot of friends who were business
Right.
orientated. And, so it was
A power couple, really, weren't we, back then? 21. What were you doing working full time at 21, you?
I was basically, when I finished school,
Yep.
I didn't really know what I wanted to do at all.
Right.
And I started an arts degree and hated
Yep.
it. And I lasted about, I remember thinking, when is the cutoff? When is that cutoff that I need to get out of here before they start charging me X?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So I went home and told my mum and dad, that's it, I've pulled out. And I'm going to work.
How did that conversation go? We had a little bit of a chat before we came on about your parents. So Dad was a doctor. So hi, Dad, I've got some news. That's great, darling. What? I'm leaving university. Geez, that would have been an interesting conversation.
Oh yeah, they were not happy. So I'm the eldest of 5 kids, and I really did not set a good example. All the others went to uni straight from school, but not me. And
right.
I just remember thinking, I knew that it was the right thing. I did not want to go and do something that I wasn't interested in. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do, but I also was incredibly ambitious. So I was like, right, whatever I do, if I'm not at university, I have to make sure that this makes, really counts on my resume. I need to make sure I do something great. So that's sort of where I think that drive came. It was sort of like a bit of a chip on my shoulder, probably, with my parents.
Yeah. So what were we doing? We weren't clearly studying. What was the career?
Yeah. So I started working in retail, and I'd always loved fashion. It's been a bit of my life. And so when I started working, I just loved it. I loved working and talking to customers and, sort of just the responsibility that came with it. And so after about probably 8 months, I got asked to start running my own store and my own stores. And then eventually I became a regional communications manager at 21, and I was I was basically doing all of the state's communications and rostering, and also managing any underperforming stores. So they would put me into an area where there'd be underperforming stores, and I would turn them around. So
at 21.
21. I know it feels like I felt old at that time, but now when I look back, like a baby.
Do you pinch yourself in that time and just go, looking back at that time, like you're saying, and go, how on earth did I do that? Because that's remarkable. I mean, that's really, really impressive.
Yeah, I think I was a real workaholic. I had no problem working till hours and hours after everyone else went home. Yeah. I just, no, my dad was a real workaholic too. I think it's natural to me. And I've learned how to curb that a bit as I've got older, but definitely that was that drive, I have to do this. And my husband was also working really hard too. So he used to work 7 days a week. So together we were working a lot.
Wow. So 21st, career's on your way.
Yeah.
Obviously you decided at uni, no thanks. Did you have an idea? Was retail the goal, or what was the kind of 30, looking at when you were, say, 21, looking at, say, that, we're nearly be old and 30, wouldn't that be nice, old and 30?
Yes.
Was there a goal that you had in terms of this is where my career is going to take me?
I would say no. So at 21, I realised, it was really when I was 21 that I realised, actually, this is not for me forever. This is as far as I want to go. I still loved retail though. I loved the pace of it, and I was interested in it all. But I knew that I needed to find something more. This was not going to satisfy me for my life. So I decided to go and study PR, and public relations was something that I sort of, toyed with, but hadn't really given it much consideration. So I decided to go back and study. And at the time I was studying, I was also working for a startup company, which was one of the first internet businesses in Australia, really. And
wow.
was launched around the same time Seek launched. So about that sort of stage. And I was also working in a menswear store at that stage. So I was doing about 30 hours.
Right. And you were sleeping about an hour a night occasionally. Like it's because we don't do anything by half. Wow. Okay.
So that was a great experience, I've got to say, though. I really enjoyed working for a startup at that stage. We were in this tiny little shop front opposite Victoria Market, and I was writing copy for the website and doing a bit of buying, and yeah, it was great.
So how did you end up in I mean, you must be very good with people. How did you end up in a firm like that? Just slipped on a banana peel and appeared kind of thing. Obviously, you were good at networking, or was it making those opportunities happen for you when they arise?
Yeah. I think I've always been someone who says yes before thinking, about it. So even and I do it consciously as I've got older, because I know that I will, if I think too much about something, I'll start worrying about it and maybe say no. So I just always say yes, and I always did that when I was younger. And so what happened was I was one of the ladies, a lady who was brought in to come into the retail company that I was working with at the time. So when I was 21. And she was, and her family was, or her brothers, who were ex-Boston Consulting Group, were starting a company, a startup, and she asked me to come and do some work with her when she knew I was going back to study in PR as well. So that was sort of the lucky, I suppose, that's where that little lucky break came from.
So let's talk about you currently, 2000 and what are we at? Late 2023. How did it get to be late 2023? What does life look like now? And how did we go from being in a startup, some, small little internet company to Sarah now?
Right. Well, I mean, definitely the in between that was a big stint at
the lot. Yeah. You've only worked for a couple of small firms really since then, haven't you? Brands no one's ever heard of. So let's name drop the brands, Sarah. Come on, let's do this.
Yeah, so
it's okay to say NAB and Coles.
Yeah, NAB and Coles, and Coles Myer at the time. So I think a lot of the things that I'd done, funnily enough, a lot of the things I'd done in that little startup actually was really helpful, because at that stage Coles wasn't even doing anything in the online space. So I started looking after their online businesses from a PR perspective, consumer PR stuff, and that was good. And then I did, and I also I moved into sort of more the issues management. At the time, it was split between good media and bad media, and I loved it's not bad media, but the more issues orientated corporate stuff. Then I went on to NAB. Then I went to NAB after a takeover from Wesfarmers.
Right. Okay. When Coles was bought out by Wesfarmers back in the day, is that right? Yep. Right. So at NAB, I assume you were doing this again. So you've gone from quite an issue, as we say, can't believe I'm about to say this, issues-rich environment at Coles to let's just continue on and do more. I mean, did you get more? Jobs notwithstanding. I mean, there's banking and there's like issues not rich environments.
No. And it seemed it's funny when you think about it. It was, at the time I was at Coles, that was what all the papers were wrote about every day. I mean, there was 5 or something journalists who just wrote on Coles and Woolies every day. That was the scale of it. And then you had, and so at least I found with NAB, it wasn't as many sort of but it wasn't as issues orientated. It still had heaps and heaps of issues, but the spotlight began to switch to banks when I was there, because I was there during the GFC. And so I had, all of that working through. My role was heading up all the internal communications areas for the corporate. That included TV station. There was
NAB TV was there.
Yeah, we had a TV station which did live TV. And eventually we transitioned that into a more of a what's it called? On demand. On demand.
NAB on demand. There you go. But I guess that's really important about it, because you've got such an important internal audience, don't you? And those big corporates, you've got such an incredibly important, and we could talk hours about it tonight, but about the importance of internal comms and messaging and values, and the CEO and the executive staff and the board being seen. Is that kind of how it all?
Absolutely. And
a whole bunch of internal comms PR theory thrown into a couple of poorly put sentences.
Yeah, exactly. And so we had, what was happening externally has to be reflected internally. Your internal audience need to know before externally, within reason, obviously, because there's market limitations as well. But you need to be you need to be making sure that those messages are consistent, because not only are they shareholders, your employees, they're also customers. And also that message, you can't send your team a message saying, don't worry about it, it's all fine, and then tell the media something completely different. So that's incredibly it was an incredibly challenging, wonderful, interesting role. I had a large team there, and moving that from the TV to on demand was a really new sort of approach as well at the time.
So let's just maybe dig deeper into that. How do and again, not having worked in big corporate firms myself or in that environment, how does in that environment, say with an ABBA or Coles or any other large, they're big companies, how do you make sure that the voice of the CEO and the style of the CEO is reflected not only in the messaging but also the unwritten culture of the place, unwritten ground rules, and make it consistent? Does that make sense? It's a long, weird question, I guess, but
yeah.
how do you? Yeah,
I think I know what you mean. So in terms of tone and that sort of thing, you really learn the person that you're working with. So if you're writing the speeches, you're writing all their sort of first drafts and second drafts, and so you definitely learn that tone. And then obviously you've got to be really aware of what's sensitive and what's not.
yes.
And I have worked for people who have had more challenges around that stuff than others. Some are fantastic and know exactly what to say, and others who need a bit more support. So,
right. I know from my time as a ministerial staffer here in Australia, then also when I was doing speech writing in New Zealand, if you could once you started getting the trust of the person you were writing for, and they started being more prepared to give a little bit of more of themselves in what you were prepared to let them say, what they are prepared to let you say.
Yeah,
that makes sense. But then I guess when you've got everything from, you've got your shareholders, you've got to think about the ASX, you've got to think about what do I know that's confidential that I shouldn't have the CEO talk about. Are all those things kind of permutations of what you were doing? Absolutely. Minute by minute, day by day kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. And across at Coles as well. So, and then you've also got your senior leaders. So often, all these big companies have your top 200 leaders. So they all need to be informed, and they have sort of slightly more in-depth messages. So you're getting all of those messages right, and making sure it's authentic from the leader, from the, the top is important. And often it's about crafting. So the internal stuff comes after, the media release, the ASX release.
Right.
Then you're crafting messages on the back of those things. I mean, it doesn't start then; it starts at the beginning, because all of those messages have to be consistent. But
true,
you're often sort of seeing the last cut, and then it's like, okay, I've got my draft now. I've got to work through that. So that was sort of
right.
Yeah, that was. But the internal stuff. While you might be communicating to media or investors on specific issues or specific topics, with your audience internally, it's a consistent strategic approach. Demonstrating progress against strategy consistently, but also talking to things that might be popping up in the media that they're having to deal with from their friends at barbecues, or they can be your biggest advocates as well for the company.
True. So you started in the small startup, worked your way through Coles now. What are the kind of lessons that you took, and what are some of the challenges? So let's do that kind of, keep chuck change. What are some of the things you look back at now and you go, okay, I learned these kind of 3 or 4 lessons there, and what were some of those challenges? And I think you've alluded to some of them, but were the specifics without being, too pointed, that you go, oh, okay, that's something I worked through and made me better for those challenges, for example?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think there's always challenges with. I'm just trying to think. what I want to say there.
Because they're not easy roles, these roles. Like, I mean, you're in a very high-powered situation with a big multinational, you know, I mean, got big company, Coles, very, very, you know, strong brand in Australia. Same with NAB, different, you know, it's B2C and B2C and isn't it, yeah, business and B2B. You know, were there things that you, when you're in the middle of issues, we don't have to talk about what they were specifically, but did you step out of yourself sometimes and go, oh, wow, you know, like if it's not killing me, it's making me stronger? Well, there's some of those, what's that old saying, you know, or, you know, and the speech comes back and it's got red pen. I used to hate that when I was a speech writer. You know, the minister I worked for occasionally would write in red pen. You're like, I just want to give you a blue pen so it doesn't make it feel so bad when it comes back.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Yeah, I think backing yourself, definitely. You know, it's funny. I was this awful writer. I know. I really always, I think it was because my dad used to correct my work sometimes and he'd do exactly that, put scribble all over it and basically tell me to go write it again.
Could you read his writing? Sorry, Dad, I shouldn't have a go because
that's a whole other story. But yeah, and so I think that sort of, you know, I always didn't think I was that good at writing. You know, I wasn't sort of top of the class or anything like that. So I always thought, oh, these people are better at writing than me. But it's something I really practiced. And I think that's one thing I learned is that the more that you do something, the better you get at it. And, you know, and so, and especially if you focus on it. So that was for me one thing. In terms of the attention to detail, something that I had to really work on, you know, knowing that.
Right.
And because the pressure I think that I found was, you know, to not have anything wrong, ever go wrong, you know, because it's so public. You know, if you put someone's name in there that last week he was going to be let go and this week he's not, and you muck up the drafts and suddenly that's gone out to everybody, you know, it's that sort of thing used to cause me a lot.
Got nowhere to hide.
So
absolutely.
So
and was those things that kind of worried you when you're in the middle of them? I know, you know.
Yeah,
I just remember putting out some stuff occasionally when I was a political staffer and you go, oh, I hope this is not wrong. So you're in the middle of it going, don't stuff it up, Sarah, don't stuff it up.
Yes, absolutely. I used to, you know, worry about that stuff all the time. Yeah, that would keep me up and I'd be double checking and triple checking and, you know, because I wouldn't say I'm overly detail orientated. I'm much more big picture. And so those sorts of things, you know. And then I think just pushing yourself out of those comfort zones, you know, the first time that you talk to media about something really uncomfortable, the first time you talk, you know, on camera, the first time you do a radio interview or anything, you know, all of those things just, so I always felt that throughout that time, I was always pushing myself out of my comfort zone constantly. And there
was that something deliberate that you wanted to, did you kind of seek out those roles or those responsibilities in those firms? Right.
Yeah, always. I always, or like, you know, I think I said before about, I always said yes. Like, I'm like, yes, I'll do that. Yep.
Yeah.
I'll take that role. Okay. And then I'd sit there and go, oh my God, what have I done? But
you go home to the boyfriend, now husband, and go, what have I done today?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So that was definitely something. And I think also building relationships, you know, learning how to build relationships with people in different areas. And I think another thing which I found probably more challenging at NAB than I did at Coles was really getting into content that or topics that maybe you weren't your forte. You know, so I worked across financial services at Coles as well. So a number of different areas in Coles because, you know, they were doing everything from launching gift cards to credit cards to
big business, multifaceted, you know.
Yeah.
Many verticals.
So learning different things and sort of knowing how much you needed to know and how much you didn't, because you could, you know, that you could be wasting a lot of time if you were too down in the detail.
That's actually a really good question in terms of how, as generalists, and not that I'm a comms person anymore, I don't think I'd count myself a comms person for many, many years, but as someone who's a generalist in my own right, how did you learn how to know enough without having to kind of, like, it's almost like you needed almost like a mini degree on a lot of these things at the time.
Yeah. I think you learn to know that it's actually a benefit. And I see it now too. There's a benefit in not knowing so much because you can, and as a good communication is simple communication that doesn't confuse people. And I think that's the power of having people who can not be so close to a topic.
Right. And are able then to step back and look at the bigger picture. Is that what you're saying as well?
Yeah,
Just being
bigger
able to
picture.
put
And
it into context.
the
And
dots. Yeah,
yeah.
join the dots, put it into context, write about it so that the average person understands it. And, I often say this to my clients, like, I want your LinkedIn profile to be, how you talk, how you would explain to your grandma what you do. It shouldn't
That's a
be
good idea.
It shouldn't be full of jargon. It should be something that you feel comfortable talking to, that sounds interesting, that people go, oh, that's interesting. I might want to connect with this person. Tell me more.
Well, we're going to come to that because that's very interesting. So I guess that goes to my next question about what were some of the leadership observations that you you're obviously with some very high-powered people, and
Yep.
were there things that you were in the middle of, and we've talked a little bit about West Wing before, but, were there kind of those moments where you went, oh, okay, wow, I'm in the middle of something that's happening here, or I'm watching this person and I know this is a learning experience for me, or, conversely, not all leaders are great,
Yeah.
What were some of those leadership observations that you had?
I had I remember working with a guy who was on the leadership team I was in with one of the big businesses within Coles, and he said to me once, and we just had a bad experience, and he said, Sarah, and I was quite young still, so he said, there's probably 15 years between us, and he said, you know what, you get a good boss maybe once every 10 years. I was like, oh, great, that's awesome. So that's always sort of stuck with me because I have seen some very bad leadership. And I think, when I first started my career, there was a lot placed on your authority, your position. So I've seen a lot, but then I've also been incredibly lucky to have some amazing leaders who, I wouldn't have achieved what I achieved in my career without them. So.
And what were some of those traits of the good leaders? Because everyone knows what a bad leader is. I mean, that's why there's probably lots of podcasts on what bad leaders are, as opposed to something like this where hopefully it's about good leaders. But what were some of the good leadership traits? No, it's true. Like,
I think
we all know what a bad leader is. You can see them a mile off. They're the ones throwing their weight around and
making it all
waggling their fingers and saying, yeah.
Yeah, I had I could point to about 5 different leaders I've had over my time, but I would say one of the people I worked with who was exceptionally good she was very good at backing everybody. So, you in a role that she thought, if you stuffed up because you didn't have experience, she would get the blowback. But she really backed you, supported you 100%, gave you as much support and as much team, but also made you not rely on her, which I think is another thing, to not need her. And then I think also she was very good at making it all about the team, about what the team was doing. And it was never about her, ever. And I think that's always a good sign of a good leader.
So let's change tack if we can. Let's talk about one of your other passions, fashion design. Can we talk about fashion design? Is that okay? Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
I love that.
If we must. So walk us through that. How did it develop over time? And obviously you started in retail, but, tell us about fashion, Sarah. Let's change the topic a little bit.
Okay.
Change it
so
up.
when I was a kid, I used to loved dressing up and all that, but it wasn't really that. I used to have a scrapbook and I used to design bathers, bikinis, right? And I'd just do.
As you do. Like, this is the days before the internet and before Pinterest. So you were the original Pinterest person.
I was. And I was, I had these books, and I'd create this, and I'm going to have a bikini shop, and it's going to be amazing. And, I'm going to have, and I would draw all these things anyway. And I did art all the way up until year 12, finished art, did art VCE. And then I didn't touch it again for a long time. Because I went into fashion and, that sort of filled that need. And so that was all fine. Then when I had kids and I took a time off, I decided to go and study fashion design. And I thought, I really,
that's cool.
Really want to do this. So I did. And I also started a fashion blog at the same time with a friend, and called Style and Tonic. And that was just a creative outlet.
What a great
basically.
name.
Yeah. It was
Style and Tonic. I like that.
And that was in must have been 2000 and maybe 14. So, and we were getting asked from like the Iconic to advertise and, stuff like that. It was really exciting, but we didn't monetize it. It was a big, big mistake, but we just didn't have the time. I had to, young kids. And anyway, and then I realized, I actually don't want to have my own fashion business. I just decided what I really loved was what I was doing in corporate. I loved the passion, the excitement, that was that was where my creative outlet was. I was happy to draw, draw pictures and do everything, but what I really enjoyed was communication. What I was really good at was helping people strategize, their profile.
So is it still a passion? Are you still doing Pinterest with?
The fashion. Okay. Well, funnily enough, my sister started her own fashion business a few years later.
There you go.
About 6 years ago.
Do you know anyone that might be able to help her with PR and corporate comms? No,
yeah. And she's got a really successful.
So did you help her out with that?
I did in the beginning. I used to go and do all the photo shoots with her. I used to do.
Very cool.
So yeah. So now that's just now it's all reserved for shopping and also I love to draw. So fashion illustration.
What do we draw?
Fashion. Yep. So there's a word for them. I can't think of the name of it, but basically, fashion. It's fashion illustration. So you have like a physique, like a model, and the pictures of the dresses that she's wearing, or it's very it's a bit of a creative.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
And is that something you like? We turn off work and we're like, right, I'm just going to go spend an hour or something on drawing.
Yeah.
So like, do I look George here, don't I? Like I'm going to go and spend 15% of my time focusing on that. Is that your kind of wind down?
It is
passion.
Yeah, I love it, and I don't do enough of it, to be honest. I would like to do more, but when I do it, it's always like, yes, this is something. I just feel like it's just for me, and it's really nice.
It's fantastic. Not that people can see, but Sarah's you're absolutely beaming about this stuff, aren't you? It's amazing. It's very cool. Okay, let's go back to corporate land. What made you decide to get out of Collins Street and go down and start your own business? Was that an epiphany one day, or waking up going, right, I'm not going to sell bikinis on Sorrento. I'm going to go and sell my services on the internet, on LinkedIn, and be a thought leader on LinkedIn as you are. So how did that all play out? You had the kids, you had the boys.
Yeah, I had the boys. And I thought about, I realized that I had to make a family decision. That was a big thing. So I had to make a family decision. My husband has a big business, and he was never going to be a stay-at-home dad. And I wasn't going to. I wanted to be at home with my boys, at least for have that sort of flexibility. So the corporate world was not going to be for me with this new lifestyle. They're making this family decision. So, but like I said, I just had this desire to do what I was doing, but in my own way. And so I had to really work through, what am I really good at? And I would often have people call me, and I'd be helping them through work situations, whether it was, all sorts of, and people would send me their resumes, and, and that was sort of a side little thing I'd help people out with. But then I realized what I'm actually really good at is helping people to do what I was doing in corporate, which was build their profile, get them to, be able to communicate better, and so forth. So for me, that was sort of at that point, I was like, right, I'm going to go and do this. And so I sort of worked through my value proposition. What did I want to offer? I mean, I did start off, doing a few resumes, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm definitely not doing that. Now I look at resumes, and I give great feedback for executive resumes on positioning, but I don't actually myself. But yeah, so I started my own business and decided, and haven't looked back. And funnily enough, I had looked into coaching when I left Colesmire, when Wesfarmers took over.
I'd actually thought about it's almost that you came back to an idea.
Yeah, I feel like I had looked at life coaching, and but then I went into NAB and thought, no, that's fine. I'm keeping on going on this, and I think it just was always in the back of my head, and I had to work it out, and I feel like it marinated. I had to go through this process in order to find exactly what it was that I wanted to do.
And was it? Do you remember the last day you walked out of NAB and you went, right, like, sorry, the last day you walked into NAB, and then when you walked out that afternoon, like, was it? How did you feel both those times? So you've walked in at 9 o'clock and you're on the last Friday, and then at 5 o'clock, was there a sense of excitement or, I'm ready to
No,
just bring it on now world, or what the hell have I done? Or...
No, because I took quite a few years off between the leaving and I had the kids, and then this decision to say, no, I'm not going to go back. So I was meant to go back. I was meant to be walking back into that door, and I decided, no, I'm going to do this. This is what I want to do. So, yeah, I know.
It's a very gutsy thing to do, if I can make the observation of someone who's known you for all of about an hour. But that seems to be, no, quite serious, that seems to be a very gutsy thing to do. For you and your husband to actually have just sat down and gone, okay, well, I can go to, back to corporate land in Collins Street and all that brings, or I can go out and be the entrepreneur. Like, that's a gutsy call from anyone.
Yeah, and I suppose it is. I mean, at the time, I just was, I was just so determined. I think I was, and I think baby steps, and I was trying to find, slivers of time to do this in. And so every little thing felt like it was taking so long. But now I look back and I think, well, you know what? I've been in business now 5 years, and, it's not easy, but it's been very rewarding.
Okay. So that's a lovely segue into what were some of has it been what you thought it would be, and what are some of the, and including some of the challenges? So when, if you were to envisage if you envisage 5 years ago where you would be now, notwithstanding 2 years of COVID and everyone having to, get on LinkedIn anyway, but which, and the amount of content you put on LinkedIn, I think, is absolutely brilliant, I've got to say. But so when you look from 5 years ago to now, has the journey been what you thought it might be, and what have been some of the lessons for you as a business person in your own right?
Yeah, I think for me, the lesson has been that to know who your client is just so important. I can talk to somebody and know straight away whether they are going to be the right fit, working for us to work together. And I think being really clear on who I talk to with my LinkedIn content. And, I love all my clients, so I'm very blessed in that respect, but also knowing what are the things that I really want to do and can really help them on, and what are the things that, and I think backing yourself on what those things are, and knowing that you're adding that value to those people, even if, even if it doesn't look like the way they would do it, so if the client says to you, oh, I don't, I haven't done my homework this week because I haven't done the work that you asked me to do, but I'm thinking about it and I'm doing a lot of journaling on it or something like that. It might not look like what you've told them to do, but they're still getting a lot out of what they're doing. So that's something I've learned. The other part I've learned is that I would spend at least 25% of my week marketing.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've really got to go out and sell.
Yeah, you've got to be having clients. You've got to have a pipeline. You've got to be building relationships. People need to know what you do, why you're different to other people. And I have to practice what I preach, which is a commitment I make to, myself and my clients, that, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do anything that I haven't asked you to think about doing.
Is that almost like a personal fitness trainer being the person that says, well, if you're going to do the laps, I've got to do the laps? It's like, is it how? Do you feel sometimes you just go, oh, look, I really can't be bothered getting on LinkedIn tonight? But
yeah.
I'm sure you never feel like that.
It's funny. After 5 years now, I'm very good with my content, really, but it was a struggle in the beginning, thinking, oh God, I've got to do this. Oh no, I haven't done it for 2 days, but yeah. So you get very good at creating little habits for yourself.
Right. You talk about a personal brand. What is it, and why does it matter? Simple question.
Yeah. So, I mean, we all have one, right? So there's a great, well-known comment about your personal brand is what people say about you when you leave the room. And really you are in control of it, or you can be in control of it. A lot of people choose to just pretend it's not happening, but the reality is it's something that can really benefit you and can really give you a competitive advantage. So, your personal brand, the way I think about it is all the ways that you show up. So it's the way you speak, it's the way you conduct yourself. It's the way you look. It's the way you work. It's your reputation. It's what you say. So there's all of these different. It's your online presence as well. So all of these things are built towards your brand and your positioning in the market. And it's incredibly important because it's what helps people know, who you are, what you do. It helps people understand the value you bring and how they can advocate for you. And these days, it's actually more important than ever because we live in a digital world. And if you're not doing it, potentially the person who's going for the job that you want may be doing it. And guess who's going to get the job?
Yeah. How do you? Well, it's so important that you're talking about that. How do you then work with a client or anyone to say, well, is there a fear of failure or a fear of like I don't want to do it, or not inauthenticity, which is probably not the right word, but some of your clients come to you and go, they don't want to put the head up above the parapet, so to speak, in any, or even challenge themselves because they feel like they're selling something that's not, that it's real, but it doesn't have an intrinsic value to themselves. Does that make sense? Like, do people go, it's that kind of Australian talk. I guess I'm not making that sense. I think Australians sometimes, and I defer to you as the expert in this, think it's hard to push themselves out in public sometimes because they don't want to be the tall poppy that then gets mowed down.
Yeah, definitely.
How do you get over that reticence in an age of, I know in association management land, for example, the market has changed completely from, if you're in Melbourne, then you applied for a Melbourne job, and these days it can be, remote and wherever, and that's just in my part of the world, for example. Small part of the world. How do you deal with your clients like that? Because is it a get them to really toughen up and go, look, you're going to have to push yourself here?
So there's a few things. So a lot of times someone will say to me, I don't want to look like that person on LinkedIn, whoever that person is, right? But, normally there's somebody out there doing something really cringeworthy. And then I say I always say to them, look, they're not doing it right. That there's a lot of people out there who are just throwing the spaghetti at the wall and hoping it'll stick, and it comes across as uncomfortable, and everybody's thinking, oh, that's awful. I don't want to be that. So the way I suggest with my clients is, first of all, we need to think about a mindset shift, because that was an old way of thinking in terms of, I don't need to be doing that unless I'm looking for a job, or I don't need to, or I don't really feel comfortable doing that. And the reality is now we need to think about, if I want to stay relevant and employable, then I need to be actively building my profile. And so that's sort of one component. And then the other part about it is, how do I go online if it doesn't feel comfortable? And that's when the work around who you are, what's your value that you add to your industry or to your company, what do you want to be known for, what are the messages? And then it's about demonstrating your experience and your knowledge through thought leadership, content, maybe it's stage, maybe it's podcasts, whatever it might be, but in a way that feels right for you. And that looks like sharing information, sharing your insights, maybe talking about trends in your industry. It's all about adding value to your industry. And as a result, you being the leader who's adding that value has a benefit. Now, that's the way I explain it to people.
And is there pushback along the lines sometimes where you've got like a series of tactics and they might go, no, definitely. And it's easy for me to say as someone, who's quite happy doing public speaking and has had to do it for many, many years. But how do you convince someone who might be quite shy, and that's fine, maybe an idea is to go and do it, put a paper together for a conference or get on a panel, and how do you, because that's really confronting stuff for someone that might not be used to it. Or
I totally agree. And I find people often are in that position, many times, especially if, and high performers are often really hard on themselves as well. And so they naturally will be, thinking, oh, everybody's, I'm too scared to do that. I'm going to be judged. I'm going to be mocked or whatever it might be. but
Yeah.
they don't. But what I find helps first is to be starting out with doing that work around, what are the messages I want to share, but also really honing that so that you feel really confident in that space. Because if you're trying to be everything to everybody, that's when you get the fear really kind of gets you. But also, I like to start with just something easy, and that's normally LinkedIn posts. And even that can be scary for many people. But I would never push someone into say, okay, right, off you go, YouTube channel. So what I would
Next week's homework is
So what I would say about that is that if they can start doing things, and I also think don't choose channels where that's not your thing. If you hate writing, well then that's not the place we want to be spending our time. Let's focus on something else.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And are you cognizant of that when you're having to curate your own brand as you? I mean, does that make sense? Like, is it hard to be the person who's got to be the super fit person all the time?
Yeah.
In terms of LinkedIn,
Yeah, I mean,
super fit anyway. But you know what I mean? Like, it must be very hard to set those high standards, which is fantastic for people. And I love your content on LinkedIn. That's how we connect. Like, it's always very positive and authentic and interesting and engaging. But geez, you set yourself up. You've got to make sure you deliver, Sarah, don't you?
Yeah,
and you do. But how do you do that as someone starting out with this stuff?
Yeah. So I think for me, I always think about, what are the things that I'm seeing from my clients or from the industry in general. So, and then I think about how can I give them inspiration, or how can I identify a problem that they're facing that I can help them with? And I like to, and I think this is a really powerful way to do it, is to talk about your own experiences. And so one of the activities I get my clients to do is go through, from a very young age to where they are now, what are those things, what are those key moments in your life and that you've learned things from? And that can often provide great input for, the posts that you're sharing and so forth. And obviously you don't want to do oversharing, because that's not good. That makes you that person on LinkedIn. But definitely using those stories is good.
And then how do you make sure that there isn't that oversharing? I mean, some people are, there's a very fine line. How do you navigate with your clients, or how do you strategize, those very fine lines between quirky and icky, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't actually had that problem with 99.9% of my clients. I have seen it once, and I suppose it was more around them not recognizing maybe cultural thing. So it was more around a religion thing. So, and then it was just about saying, listen, this is what I think. We stay away from religion. We stay away from politics, and sex. So if we could just, and so that wasn't
on LinkedIn. That's probably not a bad idea.
Well, there's a lot creeping in, I've noticed, but yeah, I think if you stay away from those three areas, then you don't really find yourself in that space.
Right. But then that's almost like the water cooler at work. If you don't, ask how they were the weekend was, talk about football, but
stay away from everything else. Yeah, I think it still holds true, don't you? Like, it's not.
Yes. Well, yes. Having worked in some industries that were very, yes. Moving right along, how do you, as the owner of your own small business, keep it all together? How do you switch off from work? How do you have to hide LinkedIn off your phone on the weekend? How do you be Sarah, the mum, the wife, the fashion blogista?
So I try to drive my kids to school in the morning, most mornings. I pick them up from school. So that's one thing. Otherwise they're on the tram, whatever. Like, some days I do, some days I don't. It just sort of, but I try if I can.
Right, so you're good, Mum, because the kids are talking to you. So we've got that one. So
I drive them to sport, a lot of sport. So, but I do take my laptop and sit in the car and maybe churn out a blog post. So I'm not really that great at switching off, to be honest. But one thing I do, which does help me, is on Friday night I close my door to my office, because my office is at home, and I don't really go in there until Monday. But I do work on my laptop, and I do have my phone, and I do all that. But I definitely, I cook. I try to have those sort of hard lines.
Has that been a habit you've had to get into, or obviously you started your career at a very young age? So have those lines or those boundaries that you've set, as you and the family have set, really, have they changed and evolved over time?
Yeah, they've definitely changed since I had kids. There was no, I mean, I didn't have to think about it beforehand. I would just work all the time if I
you just work.
I mean, even now, to be honest, building my business, I had to find slivers of time all the time. Okay, I've got an hour, and I still do that. I've got an hour in the car. They're at footy practice. I'll just do this. I'll get up early. I get up very early in the morning to try and sort of do it before them. And I'll normally come back, do a little bit of work, mainly in the morning, but a little bit at night if I have to. If it's like non-brain orientated work. So
yeah, the whole morning thing, and again, a shout out to Donna, because Donna, in your podcast with her it really was excellent, and I'm not just saying that because I'm not. And we'll actually put a link in the show notes if that's okay. Her podcast with you was very, very interesting, and I really liked from the couple of takeouts I got from that podcast were do the hardest work for 2 hours in the morning and block out time. And that's made it, like I won't go into how I run my diary because it's probably not appropriate, but I know that that the mornings are so incredibly important. And what did she say? Talk about you've got to run your diary according to how your body feels, not what the time of the clock is. That's actually very prescient.
And I definitely find that I have to do that. Yeah, right. Because it's not. I feel like I'm like at max by the end of the night.
Right.
So yeah, she's great. Some great tips there.
So then how do you do the switching off? If you've got your laptop with you and you're trying to build the business and you are the business, there's no one else. You can't turn around and go, oh, can you go and handle that phone call for me? It's you. You're the brand, you're the person, but you're also Sarah the person, Sarah the wife, Sarah the mum, Sarah the friend, daughter, et cetera, et cetera. How do all those different roles coalesce and work?
I do tightly schedule myself. I do try and factor in a walk every day or a run or something. Sometimes I miss it, but I block out. I try to kind of make sure my diary is set for the week before. I mean, I do have a little bit of movement, but not much. And I think like what Donna said around using those empty hours to at least even just brain dump, where my brain's just not working, and then I can fire into. Okay, now I'm doing the serious stuff. I've done the thinking last night. But I think switching off is not my best thing. And I think because, it's your business. So you don't really, you want it to be successful. And you just, the benefit, I read in a book, Kate Toon's book, she said, the best thing about having your own business is that you get to choose where you actually do those extra 80 hours of work a week. That is spot on. So,
wow. Well, all power to your arm. Far out. Is there a book that you have come back to time and time again that you pick up for inspiration, even if you know it backwards? I've got a couple. Are there a couple of books or one or two books that you look at and you go, oh, right, that's my go-to?
Yeah, definitely.
For whatever reason.
It's probably one that you hear all the time. So unfortunately, I'm not being very original, but Think and Grow Rich.
No.
Napoleon Hill.
Very cool.
It's definitely one I've read. Oh, I can't even tell you how many times I've read that because I'm very, very passionate about mindset. So that one. I also really love I think it's the Power of Awareness. I should get the name right, by Neville Goddard. And then I'm a really big fan of, again, I've read these numerous times, The Compound Effect and the James Clear Atomic Habits. Both of them I've read numerous times. What about you? What do you?
Latter of which we have multiple copies. Well, I'm a geek, so I keep coming back to, and not that it's about politics, but and I don't know. Well, I kind of do know why. Colin Powell, the late Colin Powell, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, fascinated because of my. I will admit, listeners, I'm an American history geek, and I find we talked a little bit about West Wing before we came on formally, but his autobiography and there's two biographies on him. I've thought it is probably his journey, how he had to manage upwards, how he had to make some very tough decisions, and whatever we think about people's politics or not, or history has how history judges people.
Yeah.
I think he was probably a fundamentally decent man, and passed during COVID period, I think last year or year before last, but his ability to work his way through the political minefield, sorry, pun not intended, of Washington, D.C. and the Pentagon and the White House, the first African-American, Caribbean-American joint chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, the youngest general ever appointed to that role, first non-commissioned. He didn't do anything new, and it was coming out of, he only got into the Army shortly after segregation ended in the American Armed Forces. So this is, there weren't many, without being rude, there weren't many non-white commissioned officers in West Point during his time. So for me, and here I am, as vanilla as you could possibly get from the outer eastern suburbs of Leader out in the sticks in Melbourne. But that book's always resonated because of his like you're talking about, his self-awareness and his ability to reflect upon where he could have done things better. And there's a couple of instances in his career that he said, oh, hang on, I could have done that. And whatever you think about Iran Contra, like there's a whole bunch of stuff and you go, wow.
The man
he thought about it. And the ability to self-reflect, I think, in any leader, that's why I'm doing this podcast, so I can basically tap into the minds of, people like yourself and other leaders and go, okay, well, that's really good to learn from. So that's probably the book that and it's very well dog-eared, and it's sit next to my bed, and my wife's like, haven't you finished it? I'm like, no, I just come back to it occasionally. I'll read a chapter on that, or I'll go back. And that's the book that I probably come back to. So
okay, well, I haven't read that one, so I'll have to put that on.
Yeah, I think it's called My American Journey, and then there's the Obama stuff, which just sits on the bookshelf behind me, which I just go to and go, what another remarkable person. What's your advice to people who work? This is about you, Sarah. We're talking about me. What's your advice to people who what's your advice to people who you work with who think that their career should be linear or A to B to CEO? So, do you have that? Have you worked in those environments where there's, you've got these young up and comers and they go, right, I'm starting at regional general manager and next week I'm going to be chair of the Coles-Myer board.
Yeah.
How do you manage expectations with your clients?
So I find most people are, and this is quite, there's a lot of like research in this space, but that once you're at a certain level in your career, it's far less about competency, and skill. It's all about influence and being seen as a leader. So what
is that scary in a way, though?
Yeah, and it's probably why people.
And I'm not trying to be difficult, but I'm asking that you don't have to be a good leader to be competent, but then not all leaders are competent.
Yeah. And that's why people will say, he's surprised he got the job, but he can talk. Or, you hear those sorts of comments from different people. And that's often why, because they've navigated that next level, So once you're at a certain level, it's just expected. You're really good at what you do. So what separates you between there and the next level? And so there's a number of different things. And yes, obviously power and politics and all of that sort of thing comes into it. And there's a fantastic book called 7 Rules of Power by Jeffrey Pfeffer, who's a Stanford professor, which is a fascinating book on leadership.
Okay, cool.
And he'd be great to have on a podcast. And anyway.
Oh, we've got him next week.
Lucky you. I've tried for ages.
I'm kidding. I just got kicked under the table there. Sorry, I'm kidding. All the way from the other side of the seat. No, I'm kidding. But no, that sounds like a very interesting
very interesting
writer and leader in his own right.
So I say to them, it's about thinking differently. It's not just about more hard work or another degree, which is what a lot of people think. It's about, okay, what's your strategy for getting there? And it does take time. And I think people sort of, and the worst thing is when you see somebody who's had a job that's had a high influential job, they've lost the job and they had that influence or brand in the market because of their job. and now they have to find another job.
Yes.
And so they're really starting from scratch. So I always recommend to my clients, like, do that work now. Start building those, those lifeboats that are there potentially for you, should the worst happen, or should you decide to change companies. You've got those little lifeboats ready for you. And that's about building your brand, building your strategic networks, having authority in the market, your positioning's correct. People know the value you bring. So, if somebody says to me, I want that job next week, I would definitely counsel them around, let's have a look at where you are now. And,
give them that fearless and frank advice.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
What are some of the skills that tomorrow's leaders need? So here we are, recording this late 2023. Do you see some of your clients that come in and you go, all right, you've got the X factor. Like, I can see you, probably the sports fan of me coming out, the sports writer of me coming out, going, okay, right, you've just got it, and you can pick it, or and with some of those X factors, people, do you have to then kind of almost not wind them back a bit, but when they're so right, I'm on my way. So how does that work with somebody? How do you manage? So there's two parts to that question. How do you manage some of those expectations with clients who clearly are very, very talented and engaging? But then what are some of the skills that you think tomorrow's leaders need? And I'm not talking about we've all got to learn how to make avatars of ourselves for ChatGPT or something. But
no. I think self-awareness is number one. And that's one of the key things, I suppose, is I do a bit of work initially with my clients around that. What is your brand reputation right now? What is that? And what's, who are you? And sort of doing that deep reflective work. And then I think that in terms of being a leader tomorrow, like the leadership side of things, for me, I think resilience obviously is incredibly important. Being able to manage change with teams, diverse teams and so forth. Without a doubt, being an excellent communicator. And I think communication skills are just critical. They can make or break you. And also I think confidence is really another important element. And I believe that confidence comes from clarity of who you are, clarity of what you're doing, clarity of where you're going.
Wow.
Those things I would say are and the communication part includes things like, being able to tell stories, business stories that engage people and bring them along. And being able to adapt quickly.
Those are soft, in inverted commas, soft skills that are so incredibly hard.
Yes.
Is that a fair observation?
And not everybody wants to learn them, I think, either.
Right. So coming back to that point, how, and with you in your own right, how do you manage? And you've talked a little bit about this, and like using those hours where you need to. What are the kind of three pieces of advice that you give your clients? You've talked about your time management. You've talked about how you've got to be authentic. Are there kind of three takeaways that with your program that you go, right, these are the kind of things that if you are about to start thinking yourself as that personal brand, which we all are, and all are from the day we all start, going and going at our parents to try to get it, whatever.
We're all selling.
We're all selling. Like, which I don't think means, you don't realise until you actually told that's what you're doing. What are the kind of three pieces you give advice?
Okay, so first of all, I would say don't leave your future in the hands of your employer.
Like that,
take control of your career, and that looks like having a goal, having a strategy, having a visibility plan. The other thing that I find that that happens a lot is it's when you're going through trouble at work. So say, for example, you're about to lose your job, you've lost your job, right? Or you're going through redundancy, or you've just heard, my role's been made redundant and I'm out. I'm going to lose my job. It's 3 months' time or whatever. Many people go out and start networking at that point, and that's not the right time to do that. Before you start doing anything. Sorry?
Isn't that a bit late?
Well, yes. I mean, yes, there's that part. But if you haven't invested your time around building your brand and building your networks and doing all that, and you're sort of gone, holy cow, this has, happened. And, a lot of people go, oh, I've got to go and reach out to all my networks. But if you haven't got a professional story, you haven't got how you add value, you can't articulate, what the value is that you bring, you don't know what you want, all of those things, it's best to just stay right away. So that's one sort of bit of advice I would give, as well as the, visibility belongs to those people who are, opportunities belong to those who are out there being visible in the market, demonstrating that they're relevant, and they're the ones that will continue to be, offered those opportunities. So, get out there. And if you are an introvert, LinkedIn is a fabulous place to network. There's lots of great strategies around to, just by identifying who it is that you want to be, that you want to build relationships with, and start commenting on their posts, start liking their posts, sharing them, and adding your bit to them as well.
Right. So thinking about what you've talked about today and all your life lessons, let's just, for the sake of ease, talk about the fact that you're out on your 21st night with boyfriend, now husband, and there's 21-year-old you and 21-year-old three. What would that conversation look like? What would 21-year-old be saying to you of today, and then you saying back to 21-year-old you?
I think the 21-year-old would be saying, is that really sort of what you did? Wow. It's good to know that you've got what, you created the life that you wanted.
Yeah.
And I think that me now, I would look back and say, you keep going, hard work always pays off. And, it's okay to be ambitious and driven. Not everybody is, which I've learnt over my career, and that's okay too. Not everybody's the same. And just back yourself on everything that you want in life. And that mindset is everything too.
And if only every 21-year-old knew about mindset and backing yourself.
Yes, wouldn't it be amazing? So I told you that I send my sons all these inspirational, motivational things on Instagram all the time. So I'm determined to brainwash them with mindset stuff.
They will come out the most well-being young men in the history of. But in all seriousness, and we'll get that they must love that in terms of, you're obviously creating very well-rounded young men in your home, and that's fantastic. How do they kind of do the whole raise their eyebrows kind of stuff, or are they understanding that there's a lovely intention of goodness and you wanting to learn? So with them, I guess in some ways.
Yeah, definitely, and we definitely are. I definitely try and cultivate a very open communication relationship, but. Yeah, they send me occasionally. They'll send me something like, "Oh, Mum, it's okay. You don't have to worry about me. I'm fine. You don't have to tell me this. I know." But I like to inspire and motivate them. But they do. You know what? It's nice. I think what makes me feel the best is when they tell me, "You made things better. You're always so motivating, Mum." So when they say things like that, it's all worth it.
That's very cool. What a great way to end. Hey, Sarah, thank you for coming on the show. Congratulations on a really interesting career. I mean, we could have gone down a whole bunch of – I could talk to you about crisis comms for hours, and maybe that's another conversation for another day about – because goodness knows in Australia, like November 2023 when we're doing this recording, there's a few of those issues out there in terms of what's been playing out in the media and a whole range of both domestic and international crises. But I really, as I said – wow.
Today?
Wow. Yes. I tell you what, you learn a lot, and how people get it wrong, as I'm very carefully self-editing what I'm thinking and not saying about certain recent events in Australia, for example, because I have to be careful. And I know when I did my master, it doesn't matter, but we did a subject on issues management and crisis comms, and it was probably the most important 6 months I've ever learned at university because it was all applied comms. Shout out to Charles Sturt Uni where I did my masters, and great university, and that issues in crisis comms, and one of the things they kept saying, apropos to nothing in particular recently, was the CEO wasn't his
up front straight away. And it doesn't matter if you don't know the answer, explain the process.
Yeah. So coming soon to you folks is a book and a podcast series by Sarah on CEOs I've known and CEOs that I've not been able to, but there's a whole bunch of conversation there. Hey, but more importantly, thank you so much for all the work you do on LinkedIn. It's really, like I said to you before, and I mean that quite sincerely. I've not met you in person, but you find people as they are on LinkedIn, and I've always enjoyed the stuff that you put out. It must be hard slog at times when you're getting up at dawn and thinking, okay, I've got to make the kids' lunches, and now I've got to turn into Collins Street motivator, power walker, let's go. And anyone in small business, and I'm not, even though I work with a bunch of wonderful businesses, I don't know how you do it. It must be, like how you switch off or you just don't. So, and I have the utmost respect for anyone and everyone who's working running their own businesses. And it can't be easy. And when I ask about how you switch off, and you go, I don't.
Let's try.
But you know what? Maybe that's part of who you are. Maybe you've never been able to switch off too, if that's a fair observation.
I think that's probably pretty fair. Yeah. Relaxing is not really my thing, unfortunately.
Right. Okay. Last scene on the Fair Star was Sarah having a read and,
Yeah.
No internet, no problems. Anyway, all good. Hey, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Dear 21-Year-Old Me.
That was really fun.
Well, what an absolute thrill it was to talk to Sarah. I've never met Sarah in person, and really enjoyed her reflections, her authenticness or authenticity. That's probably the better word, isn't it? I should know how to use these words. And her insights. And for me, there was a couple. One was about talking about stepping outside your comfort zone. Another point that she talked about the criticality of relationships, knowing your client and your personal brand, and most of all, backing yourself. And I think that's something that I've really taken from her is her humility, her ability to self-reflect, and her ability to back herself throughout her entire career. And it's been an absolute thrill to talk to Sarah. For those of us who have got a comms background, my background was in politics a million years ago, before the days of the good old Twitter and TikTok and everything else that seems to be proliferating around the social web these days. The crisis and comms perspective that she had. And we were talking late in 2023, so there's a lot going on in Australia in terms of some big brands having some big issues. And I'm sure that organisations would do well to put people like Sarah on panels or at conferences to really drill down on her views of authentic leadership and self-reflection and understanding the importance of being upfront with issues as they arise. And I guess that is good leadership in any perspective, no matter what it is. So thank you so much, Sarah, for your insights, your time, and your humility in that conversation. I really appreciated it and got a lot from it, which I guess is the whole point of this podcast, to actually learn from other leaders. And I am most grateful. I'm also grateful to you for listening wherever you are. I wanted to shout out today to a guy called Derek in Manila. Thanks, Derek, for the reaching out. That was great. I had a chat to Derek recently, and he mentioned he was a listener of the podcast. So thank you, Derek. No matter where you are around the world, we do appreciate it. You'll have to excuse my occasional focus on all things cricket and rugby. That's just who I am, and I'm not going to necessarily be able to change over time. So I do appreciate the fact wherever you are, taking the dog for a walk or jumping on the treadmill or the bike or listening to this podcast in the car or wherever, thank you for making the decision to hit play. I appreciate it, and it's great to have you along. As always, behind the scenes, Cursed Kids and the Pooch, who's managed to get through another episode without barking. Well, thankfully we can edit a bit out. Thank you for your time. You have a good one, and I will speak with you on the next episode of Dear 21-Year-Old Me. Go well, stay well, and bye for now.
Thanks for joining us today. For more episodes and links, visit dear21yearoldme.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts.